Hello,
Hey,
I'm Alex,
I'm Val.
and we are here to talk about Season 6B, 6B.7, Second Coming. The Second Coming?
The Second Coming.
The Second Coming. Written by Terrence Winter, directed by Tim Van Patten.
Pretty major team on this episode.
And just a note, in the last episode we said we didn't think we were going to make it to the end of the show. I think we're going to try.
No, we always were gonna make it. The question
we're
was.
we're not going to not make it.
The question was if you're gonna do it for you, sure.
If we had to take a big break.
Yeah.
But I
So
think
we might be pretty like Sopranos focused this weekend.
This
together.
weekend. We're gonna go for it whenever we can.
It might make us really hate the world.
Right, but that's okay.
And have existential crises. But
gotta
at least
do
we
it.
like pack it into a weekend. We don't extend it out longer.
Right, you might as well just get it out of the way.
Yeah.
So we're gonna try, and hopefully, I mean, who knows? By the time the next episodes come out, maybe we won't have made it. But our intention is to make it. That's our
Now I feel like we're committed to doing it.
Shit.
We
okay.
said it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're gonna try our best. There's only 2 more episodes. We can do. Yeah. Not our recap. Our recap will come later. There will be a break.
Yeah.
But we're really.
I also kind of want to do like once we're done.
Yeah.
Maybe just you and I can do this without recording it also. But I would.
I don't
would
think
like.
that's a good idea. I don't think we should
I would
do
like
that.
to just like do a kind of like an overhaul on like the takeaways from watching the show this time around.
Right, like a series recap,
Yeah.
series discussion.
Yeah, but like I said, we could also just like have that conversation in our private life.
I guess we could, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's possible.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about The Second Coming?
I think it's, like real endgame here that we're dealing with. Like, this is some pretty intense television. It's not, this is not something I think we could have like handled at a point of the season that wasn't leading towards the very end. Like, this is pretty, like, we are reaching the pinnacle of some of these characters' arcs, right? Like, we're reaching the point where we're gonna like leave them very shortly.
Right.
And we assume, if you haven't watched this before, or if you have, like, there might be more climactic action yet to come, right? Like, but this episode is really intense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with some major messages for the show and for Kara. Like, I think, like, again, like, with ending last episode with Tony's peyote journey, and I get it, right? We're left kind of again like questioning, okay, like, what does this mean? Like, who is Tony gonna be? Where did he choose, right? And we get a lot in this episode, and like a lot of it's really vocalized, a lot of it's really verbalized by him, which is interesting. Or
like,
or
what did
by
he crack
other characters.
about who he is?
Yeah. And anyway, so I do want to talk about some of those things.
Definitely.
But then we also, like, again, like, kind of understanding the soprano curse, I guess, better. And Carmela says that in the episode. She like talks about this whole like genealogy, right, going back to his uncle in Avellino with the donkey, right? Like, so we actually start to understand what that curse looks like, right? Because we've seen Livia, we've known Livia, we're reminded of Livia in this episode and the things that she believed and the things that she said. We see Tony on this path that he's chosen to take, and his depression in this episode also. And then we see AJ and how that's kind of like carried down through him.
Right.
And like, even like, despite kind of like best intentions of it not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that like the title, The Second Coming, it is a second coming of Anthony. Like, it is this repetition of Anthony's faults and Anthony's character through AJ. Like, we're seeing basically this cycle that kind of constantly exists, and we're seeing how AJ is kind of falling into the same some of the same behaviors as Anthony. He's a different person, but we can see how Tony Soprano's behavior has influenced AJ and has maybe impacted who he is becoming. In fact, his relationship with depression and the way that he talks about it is very similar. And this idea of a big nothing and this concept of nihilism that's been passed down through generations, we can kind of see these ideas kind of perpetuating these characters born at different times, and that's carried out through their life and just continues this cycle through their offspring. I also agree, like, I think by the end of this episode we're definitely in a different place. We're in the end game of the show. It's an interesting episode because for part of it while I was watching, it actually felt very kind of narrative driven. There was a lot of just events happening.
Yeah, action.
Yeah, this New York story is kind of amping up. We have this story with AJ that's very dramatic. There's a lot of things that are happening that are taking us to a new place where the show can end, that have been more traditionally dramatic than a lot of the other focuses throughout this season. So at times it felt kind of less symbolic and less thematic, but I still think that those things exist and they kind of creep their way back in. And I think there's also this nice kind of bookending where things are related to the beginning of the show. We reinvestigate Livia's philosophy. We really look at the impact of mothers. We also start to kind of look at the impact
Understand
of fathers
therapy
too.
also.
Looking at therapy is definitely a really key part that's kind of been abandoned for part of the show, but is now being revisited. And there is a lot of narrative development in this episode, but I think there is also a lot of other stuff to kind of dive into.
It's so masterful. It's just crazy what this team and these writers can do within the context of a 50-minute episode. It's just so perfectly executed, and again, it's like internally and externally beautiful, right? Like it's like as its own standalone episode has
right.
Its arc and its messaging, and then like in the context of the whole show just fits so amazingly within the arc of the show itself and this season.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing.
We're
just
fans.
to go
We're fans.
We're big fans. Just to go back on what you were saying about, this genealogy thing, maybe we can talk about it a little bit more. The one thing that we did have Tony saying, like after they have that conversation, at AJ's therapy, where he's talking, like they ask him, what did your grandmother say, right?
Right.
We have Tony back in Melfi's office, saying, talking about his peyote trip and saying, the thing he realized is this is not all there is, that there's something else.
Right.
And I don't know if that's true or not, right? Like now we know that, sociopaths don't respond to therapy or whatever Melfi's finding out too, right? So I don't know, like, if Tony means that, if that's what it was that he got. I'm trying to understand that difference about him saying, like, the thing I discovered on my peyote trip is this is not all there is. That goes against that it's all nothing for me.
Interesting.
And so I found that interesting that that's what he came away with, which, like we were talking about, like
right,
there is
that
this,
he had this revelation.
Yeah.
That goes against nihilism. That's interesting. I didn't really think about that.
I'm not really sure what to do with it in terms of like looking at Tony as a character, or if I believe him, or I don't know.
He
'Cause
can't
in this
really
episode,
verbalize it either, so we're kind of left with it.
Yeah. I mean, he's like obviously pretty fucked up this episode. Like some of the acting when he goes to Coco's restaurant or whatever, like just his facial expressions, he's nuts. He's like gone off the deep end.
He has gone off the deep end.
And you were saying something really interesting while we were watching the show about this and about kind of like Tony's states. Maybe we can talk about that too. I don't know.
Well, there was two kind of instances that kind of related to each other for me, and I think it is a possible reading. Like so many things in this show, you could interpret the way things occur to mean something. When he's with Melfi, the way that Melfi asks, "Are you ashamed of him?" and he says, "Actually, I am. It's the coward's way out." And then Melfi says, "But I think that person didn't understand depression." But there's this, at least my interpretation, or an interpretation, would be, sorry, she says, "But you understand depression, don't you?" And for me, the interpretation there is that there's this kind of criticism there that Tony does understand wanting to kill yourself based on perhaps his decisions in his life. There's this kind of insinuation that maybe he should even kill himself, or maybe that Melfi thinks that the only solution is for him to die. It's very, I mean, that is definitely reading into that comment, but the way that it's acted and the way that it's communicated is more than just, oh, well, you understand depression because you've been here and we've talked about depression. There's something more than that, and I think that more is suggested.
I think, like, on one level, like, she's, like, calling him out and being like, just, like, stop bullshitting me, right? Like, stop pretending that, you know, this is so embarrassing to you that your son is depressed when, like, you also clearly have issues that you struggle with, right? Like, stop trying to, like, you know, make yourself seem so different from him.
Right.
But I think what you're saying about the insinuation of, like, what Melfi thinks, like, Tony's life, I don't know, like, what is the ultimate solution for Tony to Melfi?
That would definitely be reading into it.
Yeah.
I think that she's suggesting that he should die, but there is this critical aspect of possibly suggesting, like, you should understand this, and you should understand that these feelings could lead to suicidal feelings. What is an interesting thing to think about is, like, perhaps Tony going to Coco's restaurant, acting in this enraged, crazy way,
like, knowing that it's going to be dangerous.
Knowing that it's probably suicidal.
Yeah,
thinking about the realities of being in the mob and going against a New York family that's much stronger than his. There has to be questions asked of, is he wanting to die? Is it maybe a deliberate decision? Is his subconscious maybe suggesting something to him? Is he acting in a way to respond to his life? That is a reading. The other thing, too, is that he only actually leaves his house after Meadow says that she's been dating Patrick Parisi. He doesn't leave, actually, after finding out about Coco and what he said.
Right.
So there's this other thing that actually is kind of the thing that sets him off. And again, there's this aspect of generations passing the torch. Tony and Carmela maybe wanting something different for their kids, and Meadow falling back into this orbit of New Jersey and the mob.
Well, kind of like both AJ and Meadow in different ways, right? Like, like, AJ hasn't escaped this soprano curse. Meadow also hasn't escaped, you know, the life of a mob wife, basically, right?
Exactly.
So I think, like, for both soprano kids, that's kind of what's
not going to medical school. Right?
Yeah.
It's too hard.
It's too hard.
And moving into law, which again, like, thinking about her going into law as, again, like a connection to the mafia.
Yeah.
And being in a profession that could be protecting people
useful.
like Tony. It's useful. It's much closer.
Yeah.
It doesn't have that detachment of leaving the world of New Jersey.
No, and I think for both characters, right? Like, okay, like, are they, like, better off or worse off than their own parents? I don't know, right? Like, they're not the same as Tony and Carmela. They're not, you know, they have, I mean, we see it with AJ this episode, like, he has very, and Meadow too has this kind of, like, social justice-y kind of strange,
right.
I don't know, openness is not the right word, but, like,
curiosity,
yeah, and which their parents, neither of their parents have. Right.
They're woke.
They're super woke. Yeah, you're right. No, I don't think they're quite woke, but I don't know. Like, so they do have differences, right? But, like, again, neither of them have been able to escape. It's like a darker pull.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that is a really key part.
Like a black hole. Like, again, comparison to the solar system, stuff like, you know.
Black hole. Interesting. Yeah, and I think that is a major question of, you know, where does everybody end up? And I think that there is this kind of depressing inevitability of Meadow and AJ kind of ending up in the same place as their parents, not breaking the cycle, despite the best wishes of their parents. And I think that
and kind of our hope and, like, the audience's hope for them too, right?
Because I think,
like, and that's why I think the ending of this show is, again, so amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Because
we're not there yet.
well, we're not there yet. But these writers definitely don't play to what the audience would like to see.
No, it's not about that.
No.
Yeah, it is interesting actually. Like one of the first scenes with AJ, like we have the shot on the asbestos.
Mm-hmm.
We can see New York, so there's obviously implications about Tony's actions and what he's dumping and his garbage kind of now like sifting towards New York in a way that's going to impact things. But I love not only that suggestion by the shot, but the edit and how it goes to Tony sleeping. So like this kind of idea of him being okay with it, being able to sleep through the
whatever
impact that he has,
the
destruction and the negative impact that he has through his actions and his decisions. But then it cuts to AJ not asleep and restless, and I think that there is a difference between Tony and AJ in that way,
definitely,
where AJ does not feel as comfortable with this kind of behavior, and we saw it in the last episode too
with the Somali boy and
and actually we talked about it in this episode, like where that's the question is like, is this what really has been bothering you? And there were some interesting questions there as well. Like, do you think that it has a relationship to Blanca? Like, do you think that it has been bothering
She is
you?
really tan.
She is really tan. Yeah. But it is an interesting question to ask. Like, is this impacting AJ so heavily for other reasons, for a symbolic reason?
Right.
Because it clearly that was a turning point for him. So there is something about this injustice and this inequity and this realization of class, I guess, that's kind of creeping into his life and affecting him in a very serious way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The writers are not leaving us with like a hopeful vision.
No.
For anybody.
Well,
in this
there's
show.
so much kind of depressive talk too, like AJ, why can't I catch a break? Which is so reminiscent and actually pretty much just
Tony even
identical
says exactly that.
to Tony. I
Why
mean, it's just we see him just kind of
something?
inheriting the vocabulary and the language of Tony and talking about depression. It's really interesting.
He also like he does have a thing with like materialism, right? And so like I think that's kind of what you said, like he's like having these realizations about socioeconomic class because he last episode and this episode there was a lot of like in his English class they were talking about the material world, right, and these things. And then in this episode, he talks about like, watching the news, and it goes from this, burn unit in Iraq to this mall in
Wisconsin,
in Minnesota or something like
cool.
that. Right. And so like that makes him sick. That kind of like that, other people's consumption bothers him, even though he's obviously like a consumer. Like it's not that he's,
Right, he's obviously a hypocrite.
He's obviously hypocritical.
I mean,
but
we
like,
even see like a shot, of his car that he was given and he drives, which references his comments about SUVs. He's clearly not like walking the walk.
Woke. Yeah. But that is like at least that's something that he kind of grappled with. Now, like Tony does grapple with big issues also, but.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is this existential component to what Tony is constantly thinking about. And that materialistic aspect, there's some interesting threads through the episode. This focus on watches. At the beginning, Tony giving a Carmela a watch, which typically he actually does these... He gives these gifts at moments
when
of him doing something wrong when he's been bad, and he kind of buys her off, and typically it works. Yeah. But then later on, Carmela throws the watch back. And also, for me, a really key moment is when Tony jumps into the pool to save AJ.
And there's that shot of his watch.
Close-up shots, like, on his watch. So the fact that he would jump in with the watch, there is this very human element to that scene.
Yeah.
That does humanize Tony at the end of the show. So despite him in this spiral downwards... There's this aspect that he really does love his son and he does love his family and he will act in a very human way, in a way that we can empathize with and respect. But at the same time, the jury is out on what kind of a person this guy is. Yeah. But it's amazing how they still complicate it and they still offer us these positive attributes.
Yeah. No, it is superhuman. I'm superhuman, but
superhuman.
It's superhuman. When he's like clutching AJ after he's pulled AJ out of the pool, and that final scene, which is so amazing, of them like, you know, he brings this pizza because maybe they can sit there and eat pizza together, but he can't bring
At
the
the end
pizza
of the show,
in
yeah.
at the end.
That's
And
really
so-
sad. That part really, that hits me. That's the saddest part of the whole show.
And then they have to just like kind of connect as people, we hope, right?
And we've talked about food too being this like
Yeah.
element of control.
Well,
and
Carmela also wanted to bring AJ food
Yeah.
too, and it's
And they
not
can't
allowed,
now.
right?
Yeah, so that's really interesting how they've been stripped of that. And they do
should
now.
just eat some onion rings
They're
together.
just stripped to this completely human level. But also that food potentially has been used to kind of mask some of the issues that have existed.
Yeah, well, and AJ has comment on that before,
Right.
and I forget last episode,
Recently.
the episode before. Yeah, like when do you guys can understand that food doesn't
Solve everything.
solve everything or
Yeah.
something? Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's just like it hurts my body watching this episode. It's so painful.
It is. It's really, we're in a very bleak place. And also, I mean, again, yeah, like there's just so much talk of this kind of nihilistic philosophy. I mean, also, yeah, like AJ, he's really picked up the kind of nihilist attitude. Don't you ever feel that there's no point to all this? Mm-hmm. And I think that is a kind of key theme and investigation in this episode that's kind of focused on, is this idea of kind of inevitability.
Yeah.
And this idea of generations repeating the same mistakes.
Well, even like he says, like as an individual, like I'm just an individual. What could I do?
Right.
Right. So it is kind of this like that. It's meaningless. Right. Like there's just nothing.
Yeah. Right. And it's very pessimistic.
Yeah.
I mean, we can see through Tony Soprano's actions the impact that one person can have in a negative way.
Yeah.
And obviously
Yeah.
that can exist in a positive way as well. But the attitude really isn't there.
Yeah.
Also, like AJ's depression versus Tony's depression,
Right.
if there
I
is
was
this
gonna talk about
aspect
that, yeah.
of both of them as depressed people, it's interesting to focus on
The
the differences.
Yeah.
This conversation with Carmela is interesting, between Tony and Carmela. Depressed, playing, and she's saying you're playing the depression card until
Right.
it's tattered to shreds. Throwing the watch back, actually kind of breaking out of that aspect of being kind of bought out through a material good.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something about reflecting on Tony at the end of the show where I don't know if I would claim that he really is or ever was depressed. I don't know if that is his issue.
Right.
I think it's kind of, in some ways, I think it is a cop-out. And that this conversation that occurs between, I always want to call him Peter Bogdanovich, but Elliot Kupferberg
Yeah.
and Melfi, about a sociopath and how talk therapy validates them, sharpens their skills. I think ultimately that is a better interpretation than Tony dealing with his depression.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he has a lot of issues of his own
Yeah, I
making.
don't think he'd keep going back. And that's what I was like, I was asking that, you know, last season, this season, like, why is Tony still going to therapy?
I mean, he says in this season that he's
Yeah.
going back for AJ, that he was done. I think there is an element of appearances.
I think it's because, again, like, it's sociopathic, right? Like, that's where he is
Right.
getting this validation for.
Definitely.
And I
Yeah.
think he wouldn't go if it weren't for that.
Right. And we've seen throughout the show he has honed his skills and come up with solutions to his problems through the process of talking it through with Melfi. Whereas I think with AJ it's different. I think AJ is he's a very flawed character, but I feel like he faces a more kind of true form of depression. I think that he's struggling in a very different way than Tony, and in a way that maybe his parents don't really understand, because it is impacting him more deeply.
Yeah.
There is kind of this like hopelessness that's kind of permeated his entire worldview that he seems very sick. Mm-hmm. I mean, Tony seems sick in a very different way to me.
Yes.
He doesn't
in like
seem
just like a more evil way.
Yeah, and in a way where, I mean, yeah, he's just kind of perpetuating horrible things on other people and lacking empathy, lacking responsibility. But AJ seems to be genuinely sad. And I guess Tony is too, and it manifests itself in different ways. But there is this depression in that is different. I don't think it's a crutch, and I don't think it's an excuse. Whereas I think Tony did use it in those ways.
Yeah. I think back to last episode where we have Christopher's friend saying saying that like she's never seen someone like Christopher used to tell sad stories, but Tony's actually sad.
Yeah.
And that maybe this can just look really different, right? Like maybe this is how Tony's depression manifests itself, right?
Possible.
And that's hard to diagnose also, but I see what you're saying also, and I think that that scene with Peter Bogdanovich, Elliot Kupferberg, like where that scene is leading us is kind of to this idea that like I think like we're led to really believe, and I don't know, he makes a compelling argument as an interpretation of Tony Soprano's character.
Right.
Is that the only interpretation?
No.
But he really does make it compelling.
Is it the best interpretation?
Maybe, right? And is it an interesting interpretation?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Is it part of it? Probably. Right?
Right.
But again, like this show tries to also trick us into picking like black and white.
Yeah, I mean, this show doesn't deal in absolutes. That's for sure.
And we even have like Tony in his session with Melfi this episode bringing up, like he says, like I'm a good guy basically. I love my family.
Mm-hmm. Why
and
me?
That and that he believes in this balance and this yin and this yang, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this like really black and white
right. Interesting.
symbol, right?
Right.
Like it's a
Good and bad.
good and bad. Those are the only
Right.
two things.
Balanced.
That it's balanced. And so I thought that was also an interesting insight into Tony.
It is. Also, that idea of him basically being a good guy is a question that we were asking a lot at the beginning of the show, and I think is so fundamentally and clearly untrue by this point. And as we've taken these darker turns, it's just
And even I love my family.
somewhat ridiculous. Yeah, and even like on the watch saying, "You are my life" to Carmela. I mean, clearly she is not his life.
No.
We've witnessed his life now
Yeah.
for a long time.
Yeah.
And Carmela is a part of it, but it is definitely probably
It's
not even
like-
the center of it.
Yeah. No, it's pretty peripheral.
Yeah.
Peripheral. Yeah, no, like, Melfi says, that he's searching for something. I don't know that he really is searching for anything. Like, I don't know, like, what are Tony Soprano's, again, like, okay, yeah, Carmela being his life, like, what are his goals? What is he reaching for, searching for?
Well, that's a good question.
Right?
And in some ways, I think there is that possible reading at this point of maybe he is just kind of overreaching and trying to just gain, either by reading it of wanting to gain control in the face of losing control, like we talked about last episode.
Yes.
Or taking it really far and thinking that he's just pushing things so far that
He just has to.
the reaction actually comes back, and that the yin and the yang occurs, and the action, all these horrible actions will respond with their reaction, which could be him dying, which maybe is the best thing.
Dark.
Very strong reading, but
Dark reading. This is going to be a
interesting.
fun weekend of Sopranos we're going to
Hooray.
have. That's bleak. I think definitely. I also think it's really interesting, like what we learn about Tony's character and his actions, like with this, quote unquote soprano curse in his blood. When we get that recall back to Livia's statement, right? Like, in the end, your friends and family let you down and you die in your own arms.
Yeah.
I think, trying to understand or aiming to understand a character, or even, two characters, if we're thinking about Tony and AJ, who that's their outlook on life, right? So, your friends and family are not reliable, right? They're going to let you down eventually. And in the end, you're alone. And that's and this is this, I guess, whatever, her hereditary outlook on life that you've encountered. And so what that means for you as you go about the world. And we see that with Tony, right? Like, Tony kills his friends and his family members.
Right.
He talks about that in his session last episode. The people, he's killed people close to him.
Yeah.
Right.
He sure has.
He does think his family's letting him down, right? Both families.
Well, and he admits that he thinks, take it for what it is, but
Yeah.
he admits that AJ is an
embarrassing him,
Yeah.
right?
He's ashamed of him.
And so, so what's he left with? Like, he can just, like, I don't know. For me, it's like you can kind of like burn all your bridges now because, like, it doesn't matter. In the end,
Right.
end, you're alone anyways.
The
right?
ultimate, yeah. Yeah. What a nice worldview. In the end, your friends and families let you down and you die in your own arms.
Yeah. And
That's nice.
you see how, like, both AJ and Tony interact with that in this episode, right?
Yeah. It's like what that old lady in Donnie Darko says.
What does she say?
We all die alone. And
Oh.
then Jake Gyllenhaal gets sad about it.
Oh God, Donnie Darko. I haven't watched that movie since I was sad and in high school.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that in the ultimate Soprano episodes. It's not necessary, but it's my fault. I brought it up.
Yeah, you did bring it
just
up.
reminded me of it. That's what she says. It's a philosophy, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah, and then anyhow, we have Tony saying at least 2 times this episode, if not more, poor you. He says poor you to AJ, he says poor you to Carmela.
right. The language that we've seen developed, this like kind of language of nihilism, really does make a strong appearance in this episode.
Really does.
And it's really interesting how we see it
poem.
coming from different characters.
Yes.
How it's like officially permeated everybody in this world.
Yeah.
It's gone beyond just Livia. It really has successfully. It's kind of like a contagion.
Well, and we know that it goes back past Livia. Although interestingly, interestingly, when they're talking about that hierarchy, they actually don't mention Livia. They mention Johnny Boy.
Right.
Right? Like it's like his lineage.
Right.
So they actually don't even like say that about Livia in this episode.
Right. Well,
But Tony talks about the mothers as buses.
But ultimately, which we should talk about. But interestingly, like, if this is our kind of analysis of how these things are passed along, is it even Livia's fault? You know, I mean, like,
Right.
is Livia even to blame? This question of nature versus nurture.
Well,
that
it's just like asking like who's to blame, Tony or Carmela.
Exactly.
It's questions it's kind of like irrelevant in
besides
some ways.
the point.
Yeah.
They're all factors.
Yeah.
But I'm sure Livia had an existence that was similarly affected by, the others around.
Well, yeah, like, because Carmela is consumed, but you know what I mean? Like, we see Carmela, who, okay, she's not a soprano, right? But, she had, and they refer to Tony in high school in this episode too, right? Like, that she was, how did they put it? That she married under false pretenses, something like that. How did they put it?
I think so.
That wasn't how they put it. Oh no, they did. Yeah, poor you. You got married under false pretenses, and that's when she throws the watch at him. But there's this reference back to him in high school, right? And like that Carmela could have had this other. We've had reference to like this other boyfriend who she had or whatever, right? Or the pharmacist, right? Like she does not have that possibility anymore.
No.
Like she's too far gone.
Yeah.
And so again, like we were saying, this question of of Livia, right? Like, is it passed down through Livia, or does it even matter, right? It's like she was living in this scenario with someone very much like Tony Soprano, and that has to fuck with you. I mean, you might have on your own accord some weird evil inside you too already, right? Or not evil's very strong, but you know what I mean? Like,
well, if we're talking in yin and yang terms.
Well, but you know what I mean? Like, you might have your own shit. We all do. But that, being involved in this environment really doesn't give you that much hope.
Yeah.
To be anything more than that, if not worse, I guess. Like,
right.
It makes you make questionable choices.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we have the scene with AJ, this kind of pivotal scene of AJ.
Mm-hmm, the pool.
Yeah, trying to commit suicide.
That's also a very painful scene.
It is pretty painful. It is difficult. It's interesting, too, to think about from watching the show many times. Like, it does come up rather suddenly. Like, there is this very quick escalation to this point.
Yes.
There are interesting questions that are raised, like Melfi saying perhaps he knew subconsciously that the rope was too long,
short.
And it was a statement to whatever.
Yeah. You're correct, not me.
There's also the fact that it happens in the pool, which is such a symbolic place in The Sopranos, going back to even the first episode,
Yeah.
where we actually get the ducks, this kind of metaphor that happens in the pool, and focus on it and analyze it in Melfi's session of them representing the family flying away from the pool, and Tony kind of embracing them inside that pool and being able to kind of control them, kind of being able to have them there without, kind of within his domain. It is interesting that's the place that AJ chooses to do this. Also, kind of the symbolism of water, which we've talked about so much, this idea of ablution, maybe trying to wash away your sins, which is something that characters often do before they die, going back to Vin Makazian, I think, if not maybe even earlier examples. Wow, that feels like a long time ago.
I always think about Vin Makazian.
He's great. I guess we should start watching the show again. That's what happens at the end of this show. You finish and you're like, okay, I guess I should start again. Like, what should we watch next? It's like,
Nothing.
Sopranos, I guess. Except this time, this has really taken a lot out of me, at least. I think we're done for a bit.
You, at least.
Yeah. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just find it really hard to watch. And I do think, like, similarly to Tony, there is this aspect, like, it's even like, this is like kind of dark, but like, even kind of like the hyper dramatic effect of like having the bag over his head and trying to drown himself.
Right.
Like, it was like kind of like overkill of trying to kill yourself. That's like a little dark, but like, I don't know that AJ really wanted to kill himself at that moment.
Right.
I think it's a possibility, and I don't doubt that it's a possibility for like that this is something that his character would do. Right. But I do think that there is this part of AJ that is kind of like dramatic and looking like he's I don't know, maybe it's just my I have to have a little bit of hope left for him, but like that he's looking for kind of a way out of the scenario that he's in. And
right.
Like, even though that's also hard and depressing, like that, like there is some other place that he can be,
right,
around other people that aren't his family.
Right.
So I don't know. So I mean, I think like people could rightly criticize the show, I think, for maybe that feeling rushed. If it is straight up like, AJ started feeling this way last episode and now he's killing himself, it's not like out of the question.
Right.
But I do think I don't know that it was a genuine,
right,
and
we also have the aspect,
and we see his struggle, right? And that's the thing,
right,
too.
and
Like we see his struggle, which again, like, definitely happens to people who do plan to kill themselves,
right,
for real, like,
yeah.
But yeah, that there's this struggle and there's this desire to,
right. And I think it is like a moment
yeah.
for AJ, because I think we see that like he does want to live in that moment.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know like in what world he wants to live.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think really great acting by, what's his face?
Robert Eyler.
I
I agree. I think he's a good actor.
People criticize even like young
even on
AJ.
past viewings. I had a tough time. I actually think he does a great job.
See, I've always thought he did a great job.
Maybe when he's younger, there are some moments, but fair enough.
I don't know, but like, I don't know.
What were we doing when we were 13?
Yeah, exactly.
Not on The Sopranos, not like winning Emmys.
No, we weren't doing that.
No, I was doing very little.
There's that weird scene of AJ's voice overdubbed reading that poem when he's lying in bed reading the poem.
It's so manic how he kind of goes up and down from being seemingly on this better path and then on kind of in a much bleaker place. Well,
it happens that it's very cyclical for him, right? I think that is something like that almost like pushes him into a darker place when he's on these better paths, like when he is like learning or exposing himself to different people or having a relationship, right? Like, that's what kind of sends him into these spirals, kind of like interacting with the real world sends him into these spirals. back into home and
Yeah.
back into like Tony and Carmela's grasp. I don't know.
Yeah.
He's like come and gone a lot of times.
Right.
And he always is back.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. The same way Meadow is too.
The same way Meadow is, yeah. And yeah.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that magnetic pull that exists to the lifestyle.
Yep.
And how people do try to break away from it, but ultimately don't.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that scene with the poem is really, I'd like to like, you know, in my spare time, read that poem and get a better handle on it.
Yeah.
But I think that is kind of like we were talking about before, like AJ, like, you know, it's funny to see him having come from the Robert Frost poem with Meadow helping him to analyze it, right? And like we have that stuff about black and white. So he's come from there, not being able to write an essay on that, to like really getting some deep understanding, at least
maybe even if not a deep understanding, like a deep connection to this
or
work.
appreciation. Yeah, and he really likes his English class, and the episode title, The Second Coming, is after this Yeats poem, right? You know, again, I think it has multiple different layers to it, obviously, but
they do like to do that.
That is something they do. But that's like, you know, that's a class that he really enjoys, right? And but also at the same time has kind of precipitated him going down this kind of like more nihilistic philosophical, right? Like it kind of like, again, like kind of put this like on the surface good thing kind of pushes him down this darker path.
Totally.
I don't know.
Yeah.
School's hard. Med school's hard.
School's hard. Med school's hard.
Yeah. You know, that is what it is.
Yeah. I have some small kind of things that I was going to comment
Well,
on.
you say something. I'll just look at my notes, see if I have anything else.
Okay. One, very important.
Yes.
Phil Leotardo's house.
Okay, go.
We have to talk about that.
Please.
Because it's at Marlborough in Dorchester,
Yeah.
which is very close to where we just moved, and
Yeah.
that's very exciting for us. That house is not actually in Brooklyn. I hate to break it to everyone, especially us and other residents of Flatbush or Ditmas Park in Brooklyn. It's actually in Newark, but Marlborough, Dorchester, I think we'll go check it out because we can walk there in about 10 minutes. So that's cool. That's all. That was my first point.
Okay, well, what I want to say is we didn't talk about mothers as buses.
Oh, wow, we didn't talk. Okay, so that's a good segue.
Yeah.
Let's go from my wonderfully insightful comment to yours.
Yeah.
Okay, mothers as buses.
Reminding you.
Go.
You go.
Whew. I mean, I think Melfi is correct that it's very insightful, and I think that it's one of a couple moments in this episode where there are these redemptive and humanizing moments for Tony Soprano in the midst of him actually kind of devolving into his worst state. And I think that in some ways it's interesting because despite the fact that I feel like he hasn't taken therapy very seriously, and there's a strong argument to be made for how he's just honing his skills, he is actually dealing with these emotions and these questions, and maybe he actually has come to a deeper understanding of them over this time. I think that is what is kind of offered through that statement. And I think that's really interesting.
And I like that we're left with that interaction. Like that's the last we see of Tony and Melfi in this episode. Sorry, almost dropped it out there. But yeah, really interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Absolutely.
I think it's like, I think the part of it that interests me the most is like, so like I get like, he's like, you know, you're kind of like a passenger and the mothers are the buses. But then the thing he says about like, we're just like the mistake we make is that we just keep trying to get back on the bus.
Right.
I don't know what to make of that.
Well, I guess for him, there's this big nothing nihilistic aspect. And for AJ, if he's criticizing Carmela of being too coddling, of looking for comfort, looking for people to do things for him, not being a man, there is this kind of understanding that could come from that philosophy.
Right.
I suppose.
Right.
I mean, we can think of the different characters who were, you know, we know their mothers, and we can kind of analyze what it could mean.
it's a really interesting statement. Like we don't really unpack it in the show.
Yeah.
Right. Like she just kind of says like it's insightful. We don't really know why what Melfi finds insightful about it necessarily. Right. Like we don't really.
We're kind of past like dealing with Melfi as her own character. She is kind of, she serves Tony at this point.
Yeah.
Like we don't really get a window into her psyche or her thoughts that often. And we do actually see it with Kupferberg.
Yeah. Well, it's
but
funny
even
that
that's
the writers give us that, right? Like her talking about this other patient, which leads her to talk about Tony Soprano.
Right. Elliot Kupferberg with the mic drop as he drinks his like mesh water.
Yeah. He's so weird. What a great character.
Great character.
Yeah.
Okay. We have more New Yorkers and Phil all smoking cigars, very in control. Nice early Soprano symbol.
Yeah. That scene with Phil yelling out of the top of his house is
strange.
so bizarre. And like Carmine saying like, Uncle Philly, like just come down. Like it's just like a very strange scene. Phil is
I haven't
so
seen that in
up.
our neighborhood yet. Walking back from the Q train.
Yeah, such a bizarre scene. Yeah.
I have at the construction site where the New Yorkers go and end up beating up the person working. And somebody comes and complains and says, come on, it's not his fault. And then they're saying, maybe it's your fault. And then he's kind of running away. And he does say, call the cops. But there's this aspect of kind of like not stepping in.
Right.
Of like letting things
kind of like
happen.
last episode,
not taking action.
Yeah.
Not maybe, like doing the easy thing rather than the right thing.
Right.
I mean, maybe calling the police is the right thing. But I think it isn't his fault also, and it's kind of, it's unfair that he is bearing the brunt of this. But there's this like endless collateral damage that also comes from the behavior and lifestyles of the mafia and all the characters that we know. And it's there's no real justice, and there's this kind of like totem pole, and almost everybody else who's unfortunate to be brought into the orbit is just constantly suffering by the hands of the people that we're supposed to in many ways empathize with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only other thing I really had was the session, like the kind of like group therapy session with Tony and Carmela and AJ's therapist.
Yeah.
Very straight-faced man, like
very
expressionless man.
He kind of looks like
very expressionless man doctor.
Carmela's boyfriend.
Yeah, there's a similarity. But it, like I was thinking, like, because AJ says these things, he's like, did you ever, like, they're talking about him smoking weed at his confirmation and him saying, you called me an animal.
Right.
And him saying, did you ever think I was self-medicated? Like, it was me self-medicating.
Also his raincoat that he had to wear when he was in second grade.
Right? Like, it's these, and we see Tony do these things too, right? Like, using kind of the language that therapy gives you, or like the level, like this, like, focus on, you know, like therapy is like, again, like I've said this last episode, like it's all about you, right? It's this like very, it's not narcissistic, but it's a very self-centered thing to do, right? Like it's about exploring your own self. And then to see both of these characters use those things that has been said to them in therapy as weapons, right? And kind of like weaponizing therapy to, again, like Carmela said, like playing the depression card, right? To kind of like make excuses for their behavior.
Yeah.
And kind of like rationalize them in some ways too. So I thought that was an important scene also. And that's right before then the story of Livia. But anyways.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. Also like the kind of the issues that AJ has, the kind of simplicity of them. The kind of, he has actually kind of had this coddled existence.
Sure.
And that.
Oh yeah, like his thing, like the dorky raincoat one. It's like, poor you, AJ.
Yeah, I mean, like literally poor you.
Yeah. I had a mushroom cut when I was a kid.
Do you talk about it in therapy?
I'm gonna talk about it right now.
Okay. Is this your therapy?
Yeah, it is.
Cool. I believe that is all of my ideas for now.
All right. Yeah, me too. That feels good.
Feels good.
Great episode.
Great episode. Can't believe, 2 more.
Wow. Yeah.
This has been a long journey for us.
Yeah.
We started over a year ago now.
Yep.
And it's coming to an end.
If
you've been, I'm fine. It's gonna be fine. But do write to us if you are listening and interested in the same things we are and want to talk about it.
Yeah.
We like discussing these things. And thank you for listening. It's fun to do this for us.
Yeah.
And we're looking forward to coming back for the last 2, which are very major episodes in the series.
We also are thinking about what we might want to do next. Even though we're tired. We'll see when Alex gets back from his tour.
Right.
Maybe the new year.
Maybe. Yeah, we'll get there. I want to do it.
To do something else.
Yeah.
So if you have any ideas for what we should do
Right.
with our time that we've been investing into doing
yeah.
this podcast, let us know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for listening.
Bye.